Hi, and welcome back to another video. And today we had, or a couple days ago, we had this massive update of this development within the 2026 Texas Senate race. Now, if you have no idea on who's going to be running there, I don't blame you because we are still a year and a half away. We have a very long time until we get to all these Senate, governor, and House races, and so much more, for the midterms. But we are still a long way to go. Anything can happen in a very huge amount of time. But the Texas senator who is up for re-election in 2026 is Senator John Cornyn of Texas. He has won re-election now several times, each by wide margins of victory. However, this time it might be different because now we have a potential primary challenger, Ken Paxton. Now, if you don't know, Ken Paxton is the Attorney General of Texas and is a very controversial candidate, and who is somebody I'd argue is much more vulnerable than John Cornyn. Why? Because Ken Paxton has had some legal problems. I think about like almost 2 years ago now, he was impeached by the Texas State House of Representatives, but then he was acquitted in the Texas State Senate. So he has a bit of really bad history. I I genuinely can't remember what it was he was accused of, but I do remember that he was accused of doing some really bad stuff. And he went through the system as you usually do as a politician. He was impeached by the House. That was successful, but he was acquitted by the Senate. Something that upsetted one side and satisfied the other. But as of right now, Ken Paxton seems like the more Trumpy candidate here, and somebody who probably is more likely to get the Trump endorsement. Now, if he doesn't, his candidacy is probably doomed. But John Cornyn is 72 years old, or 71 years old. He's in his early 70s somewhere. This is John Cornyn over on this side. So John Cornyn is very old. And there's going to be, maybe some Republicans are going to look at him and say, we don't want him, passing the way in the middle of midterms. But yeah, his age is definitely not helping him. However, it has benefited some politicians like Ronald Reagan. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of the Republicans started comparing him to that. But his age seems to be a bit of a problem, as Ken Paxton is, more of the Trumpy candidate. And I think he's probably the candidate that the Trump base and the MAGA people inside a state like Texas would probably go for. John Cornyn could be seen as part of what Trump's base believes to be as the swamp, or part of the woke, or whatever. And John Cornyn, maybe not vulnerable to a Democrat, but maybe actually vulnerable to a Republican primary challenge, where Ken Paxton is able to convince Trump's base and a lot of Republicans inside Texas that he is not part of the swamp. Or not part of like the system that the Republicans believe that are harming their lives so much. And if he's able to do that, then he is the nominee. And just the other day, or a couple hours after he announced his campaign or his candidacy on Fox News live on TV, there were, they did the polling internals. The polling internals were released for his campaign, for the start of his campaign. And according to his internal polling, he had a 25-point lead over John Cornyn. Now, obviously, that could always be false or misleading, but if it is real, if it is true, if it is correct and accurate, that is very bad for John Cornyn. And I think that people like myself and people who are going to be paying attention to this race need to pay attention to this race. We can't sleep on this race because this primary is probably going to be very interesting, where John Cornyn is going to be very defensive and Ken Paxton is going to be very aggressive towards John Cornyn. And it's going to be very interesting, I think, to see how this race turns out. Because within a year and a half, we have no idea what the political system is going to look like. We have absolutely no idea what the issues are going to be. And I, for one, am very excited to see what it is. So, Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas, officially announced on Tuesday that he was challenging Senator John Cornyn in the Republican primary next year, setting up what is likely to be the most continuous and expensive contest of 2026. Mr. Paxton is a firebrand conservative who has sought to strongly align himself with President Donald Trump, and he has been teasing a run against Mr. Cornyn for weeks. He all but announced his intentions in an interview with the New York Times last week. On Tuesday, Mr. Paxton unveiled a website for his campaign, prominently featuring a photo of him posing with Mr. Trump, and he officially announced his run in an interview on Fox News. It is definitely time for a change in Texas, Mr. Paxton said on the program, The Ingram Angle. In a post on social media, he promised to fight for President Trump's agenda and take a sledgehammer to the D.C. establishment. So, I think that, in my honest opinion, I think that if Biden was still president, I think that Paxton would probably have a much better chance at winning the primary, because the Republicans would be looking for new opposition if Biden somehow won re-election as president. But that's not what's happening here, right? Biden isn't president anymore. Trump is. And with Trump, there is a huge movement in the Democratic Party that is looking for that change. And I don't think the Republicans I don't think Republican voters are looking for change at all. A lot of them are saying to themselves, I love what I voted for. I love what's happening right now. And as of right now, I don't think they're looking for change in the Republican establishment or in the Republican Party, because they are very grateful and very satisfied at what is happening right now. They love it. They absolutely love it. And they will probably continue to love it. And of course, the people I'm talking about is Trump's base. So if there is that level of satisfaction inside of Trump's base, I genuinely don't see why they would all of a sudden, except for maybe age and health reasons, kind of like Biden for the Democrats. But other than that, I don't see why Republicans in Texas would suddenly want to get rid of John Cornyn. Unless John Cornyn did something like, what Chuck Schumer did a couple months ago and sided with the Democrats on something, the opposing party. Other than that, and his age and health, I don't see why Republicans would want to get rid of Cornyn. Other than maybe Ken Paxton, convinces the Texas Republicans that Cornyn is a part of, what makes their lives so horrible. And if he's able to do that, then yeah, maybe he wins a primary challenge. But despite the polling internals, as of right now, I can't really put a prediction on this primary election. The numbers show momentum for Paxton, but I think the advantage as of right now is for Cornyn. Not just because he's an incumbent, but because he has won re-election so many times. So many times he has won re-election. If we go back to when he was last up for re-election, 2020, which was a major great year for Democrats. It was an election year where almost everything shifted left. Kind of like, in 4 years after, where everything shifted right for Republicans in 2024 after Trump's win. But after Biden's win, after Democrats took back the Senate, you saw John Cornyn win by 9 points. Almost double-digit lead. Now, this is a massive underperformance to what he got in 2014. Where in 2014, he won by 27 points. That's a massive shift to the left. A massive shift to the left. Now, of course, in 2020, and in 2018, where we saw Cruz perform horribly against Beto O'Rourke. Horribly. So, I mean, I guess you can argue that Cornyn's performance was a shift to the right, but if you compare his performance to 6 years prior, then yeah, that is a shift to the left. It's both on, it can be on both sides. It can be on both sides. But as of right now, yeah, Cornyn's last election performance, 2020, was 9 points. Now, we also do have a lot of Senate races that are going to be up for next year. Of course, I'll be talking about Georgia. Ossoff has already announced his campaign. There's going to be the one in Michigan, where Gary Peters is announcing he already announced his retirement. I made a video about it a couple weeks back. Minnesota probably won't be, North Carolina is definitely going to be interesting. I haven't talked about it yet, but I will make a video on it. But as for now, we are going to be focusing here on Texas. So, Texas, right? John Cornyn was able to win last time around 9 points. He got 53% of the vote. He won all the counties he needs to win. And However, this time, I think it's much more interesting because now, more importantly, is the primary now. More importantly, in the primary. As for the Republican primary, there really wasn't any, there really wasn't much challenge. I mean, you had some challenge here, but you had a lot of declines, and most of the endorsements were for John Cornyn from like Ted Cruz and Dan Patrick, who were the top leadership with not just in the Texas Republican Party, but within the Texas state government. As Ted Cruz, he's been a senator from Texas for a really long time. Dan Patrick was lieutenant governor of Texas. And so, yeah, he did not face much of a challenge, and he was able to win re-election by a wide, likely margin. Likely margin. Really wasn't a challenge much for Cornyn, despite how left, despite how blue, the country shifted back in 2020. Because we had Biden win, we had Democrats take back the Senate, we had Democrats holding the House, and yeah, 2020 overall was a really bad year, for Republicans. But Cornyn holding this 9-point lead in an election year where Trump lost re-election. So in an election year where Trump lost re-election, in an election year where Trump's approval rating dropped to record lows. In 2026, Cornyn has never gone through a Trump midterm. Cruz has, and he won by 2 points. 2 points. He just won by 2 points against Beto O'Rourke. Now, Beto O'Rourke tried to run for governor, and it didn't work out for him. So I doubt for 2026 that Democrats are going to be running somebody like Beto O'Rourke, or Colin Allred again. So I'm not sure who Texas Democrats are going to run, but I'm pretty sure we'll probably find out as we get closer to the election. But as of right now, I still think that Cornyn could be vulnerable. Not in the general, of course, but I think in the primary. In the primary, where Ken Paxton can really, push, the frustrations with MAGA and say, Cornyn is part of the system, and you're going to want to get rid of him, and I'm going to be the one that's going to fight for Trump. And so the Trump voters can go, yeah, I agree. And they vote out Cornyn. That is a likely scenario. That is a possibility that could happen. Will it happen? I'm not sure. I doubt it so far. But what the Paxton campaign is releasing so far, if what they have released is accurate, then they have the momentum. But it's still, we need to wait for actual real polling. We need to wait for these primary polls to come out, and we will see what happens. And of course, when they do, I will be, releasing it and making videos of it on the channel. But as of right now, if the numbers are correct, Paxton has momentum, and Cornyn could be vulnerable. Now, remember, Cornyn hasn't exactly announced a campaign for re-election. There have been some senators, vulnerable senators like Jon Ossoff in Georgia, who has announced re-election. And I promise I will get to Jon Ossoff eventually. I'll be making a video on him. But yeah. John Cornyn has yet to announce re-election. You have Ken Paxton, who has announced a run against John Cornyn. Now, John Cornyn could make a move here where he actually retires from politics. He doesn't run for re-election. And at that point, Ken Paxton kind of has the primary in the bag unless other Republicans jump in. That is one possibility that could happen with this election. And I'm not sure if it would happen. I'd assume because it could be, if it gets any worse, if the Trump presidency gets worse, if the approval rating gets worse, like in January, right, we had the 50%, and now we are down to 47% for the approval. We are up 50%. We are 3+ disapproval rating. 3+ disapproval rating. If that gets even worse, if Trump's approval sinks any lower, much lower, and if it looks bad in the 2026 election cycle, maybe John Cornyn looks at all this and says, yeah, I think I've spent enough time in the Senate. Maybe it's time for me to spend time with my family, and I'm just going to retire as a Texas senator and fulfill the rest of my term, because he is old enough. Either that happens, or Paxton is able to convince a majority of Texas Republicans that John Cornyn is too old for the job, he's been around forever, and you need new leadership in the Senate as a Texas senator. And the Texas Republicans vote to get rid of him. Or Cornyn is able to hold on and win the primary and then win the general election. I have no doubt that Republicans in the Senate for Texas Senate will win in Texas, in the general election against the Democrats. However, the primary is certainly going to be interesting And as of right now, for how early it is, there are several things that could happen. Several things that can happen, and Trump could have a pretty involvement in it. It all depends on who Trump endorses. If Trump endorses Paxton, it is pretty much over for Cornyn. It would be over. However, if Trump endorses Cornyn, it'd probably be over for Paxton, and Paxton wouldn't be able to convince Republicans to vote against Cornyn, and his candidacy would be over. So Trump has a big role to play in this primary election, and make sure you guys watch out for his endorsement. And if Trump endorses anyone, I will make a video on. It will be huge. It will be absolutely huge. And there are so many other races like this one that we have to pay attention to. There's gonna be other videos. There's other Senate elections up for next year that I'll be making videos on. And of course, when we get into 2026, there'll be much more videos on this. As of right now, I am trying to cover everything the best I can. But until then, we are incredibly early in this, and it's only April of 2024, or 2025, April of 2025. And we still have a long way to go until we get into this election. But as of right now, it is way too early to really have a clear picture on what's going on here. And until then, we will see. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe. And I will see you all. Oh, what is my computer doing? Hold on. I will see you all in the next video. Bye.